I wanted to challenge myself to introduce a Friday Forum speaker. I thought it would be terrifying to stand up here. I was right. Actually, I'm sorry. I don't think I can do this.
Oh.
Just kidding! I got this shit. I'm here to introduce Moses Foster. He is the CEO of West Cary Group. Even though he's a CEO, he hasn't let that squash his creativity.
Peter's telling you to mic up here.
He has not let that squash his creativity. He is a writer, a musician, and a filmmaker. All the while, he's very passionate about the strategic side of advertising too. And he's here to talk to us about the changing world of advertising. Let's give a warm welcome to Moses Foster.
Check, what okay, you can hear me. I was actually thinking, when you're in this business for as long as I've been, you start to go, okay, worst case scenario, how am I gonna rescue you neatly from the stage, come on and give the presentation and make it all look good. You have to think on your feet in this business. Thank you very much for allowing me to come to speak today. This is it sounds trite, but it really is an honor. I love talking to people that are in the field that I'm in, or aspiring to be in that field. I have a lot that I like to say. I'm interested because I'm a data-driven marketer, as you'll see from the presentation I give today. And data-driven marketers like feedback loops, so I'm very, very interested in if the content that I present actually resonates with you. That's really important, because if it doesn't, I will reshape, reform, and present it again in a different fashion so that it's more valuable to you. Okay? So as I was preparing for this conversation today, it was really interesting because, as you can see from the title, it's a bit reflective, right? How did we get here? Kind of how did my agency get here? How did I get here? How did I get in this industry? You know, what are the things that led to that? And then where are we going from here? Because if you haven't noticed, the industry is changing dramatically. And we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things. But first I want to provide, I think context is really important. So I want to provide some context as to the journey that led to me starting an agency. So I've got a lot of things I'm juggling here. Okay. All right. So that's my school system back home. I'm from Farmville, Virginia. Farmville in the house? Farmville's in the house? Wow! I did not expect that. All right. So I grew up in Farmville, Virginia. You know, and literally, I grew up on a farm in Farmville, Virginia. It's about 60 miles west of Richmond, if you don't know where it is. There are a couple colleges there, Longwood College, Hampton-Sydney College. And, you know, Farmville is, you know, just a small town. It's also a very interesting town. You know, but beneath the surface, I think there's some interesting things going on. So I went to Prince Edward County High School, home of the Eagles. And, you know, in my school, I think that free lunch was about 95% of the population, or 90% of the population was on free lunch. It's a town that has had a lot of racial strife over the years. This was an area where, when they passed the laws on desegregation in schools, they decided to close the public school system, right? So there was a private school system that was developed for white kids, but for a lot of black kids, they had no options. So they just closed the schools. And I think, you know, obviously they're open now and they reopened them, but I think that there's still vestiges of that in you know, the Farmville arena. I don't go back there as much as I used to, but when I was a kid, I kind of felt that. Nevertheless, I think there were some interesting things that were going on. There were still some remarkable things actually that were going on. One of the things that I think that was absolutely remarkable about Farmville was my parents. My parents, both of them were educators. My dad was a principal, my mom was a teacher, and she became ultimately a guidance counselor. But my parents, and I don't know how they did it, because it's not like they sat us in front of them and they gave us motivational speeches every day about succeeding in life and going on to get educated and all of that good stuff. But for some unknown reason, I had an immense amount of confidence that I could compete, that I could do things all the other kids could do, that I could succeed, that I could get good grades, that I could be a great athlete. I never doubted that. I had confidence, and I think my brothers and sisters did too, and I think that's a testament to how my parents raised me, and pretty important, I think, as a formative force in my career. I also had a really cool sister. She was remarkable. She was my oldest sister, and I think her primary objective in life was to make sure that I didn't become an idiot, right? So she started to help form my natural curiosity about things, right? So my sister's really, really, really bright, and she would spend her own money and buy chemistry sets and electronic sets, and we would sit in the basement and we would put these circuit boards together, and we'd do chemistry experiments and things like that. And she just was really, really into learning and making sure that I learned too. And so I think as a formative piece of my life, my sister was a big part of that. Because I have a natural curiosity about everything, you know? Probably just deep enough to be dangerous, you know? Not necessarily more of a dilettante than an expert, but I like to understand how things work. I like to watch how things work. Now, another fairly remarkable thing about Farmville was my elementary school. So I talked a little bit about my high school, but my elementary school. And I could not find my class picture, but that's my brother's class picture. The gentleman right here with the badly shaped throat, that's my brother. And that's the 4th grade class at the campus school, the John P. Wayne Campus School. And that's Ms. Groneweg, so it's 4th grade. So this school, you know, again, seemingly innocuous, but this school I think was really, really special. One of the reasons is before the Apple corporate headquarters, clearly we had the flying saucer down. Right? So we actually started that in Apple kind of copy. But on top of that, it was a really, really interesting school. It was on the campus of Longwood College. It was not a private school, but it was a limited admission school. There were probably maybe 200 kids total in the school. There was a lot of focus on academic achievement, but also a lot of focus on the arts. And I think when you look at the talent that came out of the school, and I'm not putting myself in that bucket, but if you look at some of the talent that came out of the school, it's just amazing, the creative forces that went to the John P. Wayne Campus School. I'll give you just a couple of names. Angus Wall, he was a friend of mine, childhood friend of mine. He lived up the street from me in Farmville. He has won 2 Oscars. He edited The Social Network movie. He also edited The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He actually also edited Seven, if you've ever seen that movie as well. So really, really top talent. And his mom, Jackie Wall, was my my elementary school art teacher. And I gotta think that, you know, all of the people that went out of that school and became kind of creative forces in some way, shape, or form touched Jackie. She was just an amazing teacher. I was not a great, you know, illustrator or designer or painter, but I had a lot of creativity in me, and she saw that and she nurtured that, and she did that with everybody that kind of had the light on in Farmville. So an amazing woman, and I think her impact has been amazing. The other, you've probably heard of him as well. Another amazing talent is Vince Gilligan. His mom was my 2nd grade teacher, and she was really interesting. I think she still lives in Chesterfield. She was a former wing walker on bi-wing planes. She, you know, we would come into class and she would, has anybody ever read Brer Rabbit? I don't even hear about it, Brer Rabbit when you were kids. So she would read us, I remember these Brer Rabbit stories she would read, and you'd come into the classroom and she'd have these chalk drawings all over the chalkboards in the classroom, and you'd walk in and it felt like you were walking into a different world. She was just an amazing woman as well. And I think obviously Vince Gilligan inherited some of her talent. Vince obviously became a filmmaker, a writer. He started his career, I believe, doing Home Fries, which is a film that he made, and then he became a writer on The X-Files. And then ultimately executive producer of The X-Files. And he's done a lot of other things as well. He did Breaking Bad, which may be the more resonant, but I gotta say I was a huge X-Files fan, and I always keyed in when I knew Vince Gilligan had written the episode, because his episodes were always really, really good. So those are just two examples of some of the creative talent that actually came out of Farmville and what was going on in that school, and there are a lot of other stories as well. So I think something really, really special is happening there at formed me. I'm a writer by trade, right? That's how I got into this business. That's how I would define myself. And I think writers are interesting people, if I do say so myself. They pay attention to the way the world works. I was telling you about my curiosity. They look at how people interact. They acknowledge expressions when someone is disappointed or angry or challenged or betrayed. You notice and note dependencies when you're a writer. You have to think, you think somewhat linearly, or at least when you're starting out in writing, I think you do. Because you have to be a structured thinker in order to tell a story, an effective story. And you have to be somewhat a student of the universe if you're going to tell effective stories as well, because the worst thing a writer can be is one that lacks credibility. And I think if you don't know your content, you don't know how the world works, you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to show. And once you diminish credibility, you're not really going to move or motivate or excite anyone. A couple of my favorite writers. I read a lot of William Faulkner when I was in college. He was the master of one of my favorite formats, which is the short story. Just incredible writer. Always moved me when I read him. Another great writer, I think maybe the best ever in my opinion, Alice Walker. So you probably know The Color Purple if you haven't read a lot of her stuff, but I encourage you to also read one of the best books I've ever read, if not the best book I've ever read in my life. It's called The Temple of My Familiar. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. And Alice Walker just moved me as I was starting to think about writing in a way that others had. So that is, when I think about some of the forces that actually motivated me to get into this industry, the writers, my school, my parents, my sister were all powerful forces. So, interestingly enough, the other thing that I think equipped me with being able to be effective in this industry is I've never been afraid of a blank sheet of paper. I've never been afraid of an empty screen. I see it as a challenge. I know I can populate it. I know I can populate it with information and content that's going to motivate someone, or instigate something, or catalyze an action, or excite someone. And I think that's a good gift to actually have when you're in this industry, because oftentimes this is where it starts. It starts with ideas. You got to have an idea. Everything starts to roll from there. When I got into the way that I actually first got into advertising is actually interesting. So I was living in Richmond, working in a completely different career, and I always thought I could be good in advertising, good in marketing, but it was the age-old, hey, you don't really have any work, so after you get some work, then show up and maybe we can find something for you. Didn't have any work, but there was a newspaper ad, a one ad in the newspaper. Now, nobody in advertising ever gets a job from answering a one ad in a newspaper, especially not now, right? Because I don't even know if they exist anymore, or a classified ad. But this agency, Huntsinger and Jefffer, led by Jerry Huntsinger, actually put an ad in the newspaper, and I responded. They were looking for a copywriter, and I responded with a resume and a letter stating that I could do that job. Now, I got a call back from the president of Huntsinger and Jefffer, a gentleman by the name of Paul Brightman, and he actually said, "We'd like you to come in. We'd like to talk to you." And I was like, "Oh man, this is interesting." I hadn't expected much because most of my trials to that time had kind of ended nowhere. And when I went in there, he explained to me what the agency actually was and why they were really interested in me. So the agency was actually a direct marketing agency, not a general advertising agency. I'll come back to that. But he said the reason why he wanted to talk to me was because a big part of direct marketing is writing letters, persuasive letters, rhetorical letters. And he said that in my cover letter, I had kind of employed all of the mechanisms of writing a good, persuasive, direct marketing letter. I had no idea what direct marketing was. I didn't know how I'd done that. I just wrote a letter, a persuasive letter. But I came to find that that is exactly what you do in direct marketing. And now it's much more than just, back then it was direct mail. Now it's much more. Now it's digital, it's social, it's mobile. Direct marketing is actually becoming more mainstream marketing. But back then, it was, direct mail ruled the day. Let me just tell you a little bit about direct mail, because I've had an interesting association with direct mail throughout my career. And I know for the young people, which is everybody in the room, direct mail seems like a staid, stodgy, old school channel. Like, who uses direct mail? Why would that be interesting? Why would you want to do that? Well, I think direct marketing and my training for direct mail is some of the best training that you can actually get if you're going to be an effective marketer and advertiser, because you think about getting someone to an action. You actually think about creating some sort of reaction in that person. It could be call a phone number. It could be go to the store and buy a product. It could be put this calendar on your refrigerator and remember our brand every time you see it. There are a lot of different things you can do, but you have to get someone to do something. The other great thing about direct marketing is you think about audience segmentation, right? So you are not creating messages for the general populace. You're actually thinking about subgroups, segments of the population that you can talk to uniquely. And that is something that I think over the years has become way more important, especially now in the age of digital, where the subgroups are actually, you can market and target those subgroups very, very easily. And at really, really low cost. You can customize experiences, obviously, based on what you know about individuals. That kind of thinking had its origins, I believe, in direct marketing. Now, direct marketing, this is not a plug for direct marketing, but one other thing about direct marketing I do want to put out. Direct marketing is a $45 billion industry. Direct mail even is a $45 billion industry, even today. Right? So by order of magnitude, television is roughly a $70 billion industry and losing steam. It's not reducing, but it's kind of holding steady at about 70 billion. And I know there's conversation around what you even call television anymore. We'll leave that for another time. Direct mail, direct marketing, 45 billion, search about 45 billion, display about 45 billion. So it's a big industry, even today. Even if it atrophied at 10% a year over the next 10 years, direct mail is still going to be around. So really cool channel. The other thing about it is it gave you long form real estate to actually tell a story that's longer than 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds, which is how we're trained now, I think, to think about storytelling. So that was a really, really interesting piece of my career as well, learning how to do direct marketing. And Jerry Hunsinger was actually, weirdly enough, because he doesn't look like the guru, right? But he was, weirdly enough, a big guru in direct marketing. From Hunsinger and Jeffler, I went to Capital One. We're going to talk about that. It took me a long time to find that internet world from 2000. I went to Capital One. Started as a copywriter, and then over time did a number of things at Capital One. Did brand management, worked in the digital group, worked in an ops role for a period of time. But there are a lot of things that I learned at Capital One, and I'm going to come back to that as well. But there was a primordial soup, if you will, that started to bubble when I was at Capital One, when I went to this conference. It was Internet World 2000, right? And back then, you could actually call a conference Internet World, and people would actually attend. It's at the Jacob Javits Center, and I saw something there with a gentleman that I would ultimately come over with me when I started West Cary Group. Changed my life and how I thought about marketing and advertising. And it was called, this was a pretty intense technology, it was called Flash animation. Anybody remember Flash? I mean, before Apple kind of said we're not doing it anymore and it just went the way of the dodo bird, Flash was really, really interesting because it enabled me to do things that I'd always wanted to do, but never could do, or it enabled me to see the line of the pathway to things that I wanted to do and never could do. So it's an animation tool. It's an animation application. Allows you to do animation. It got really annoying at the height because everybody wanted to do animation, and so you'd go to a website and you had to sit through 20 seconds of a splash page, a flash page, that opened the website. So it got overused. But in the beginning, this really struck me as kind of a turning point, a pivot in where we were going in marketing communications. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. This was a kinetic storytelling medium that invited engagement, right? I liked the fact that it was kinetic because prior to, most of the web had been static. Most of the channels that I'd used had been static. I hadn't done a lot of TV. I'd done radio, but most of the channels that I've used were static. It was information in a medium that pulled, not pushed. So broadcast pushes, right? TV is a channel that pushes messaging out. You had to go to the website to actually see the animation. That was kind of intriguing. That was interesting. So you're not bringing everybody into the conversation. You're bringing people who have actually self-selected, raised their hand, given you a signal that they want to consume the content that you have to offer. Kind of interesting. The host of the information, the people that were actually hosting the website that included the flash, were basically a mini broadcast network. They could put whatever they wanted to up there. They could talk to people however they wanted. They weren't governed by the FCC. They weren't limited by having to pay for the transmission bandwidth. If you could arrive at their address, they could present to you any messaging that you wanted. That was interesting. For me, that was seminal. The power I saw early on, even then, I could see power shifting from the big overseers of communications channels like TV stations, the movie business, all those guys, to maybe smaller players, maybe sole proprietors, maybe creative talent that had a gumption, maybe entrepreneurs. The content was interactive. You didn't just present something and expect that people would passively consume it. It was interactive. You could actually play with it. You could actually do things that would create different outcomes. That was kind of interesting to me. But I think the other thing that was really, really interesting was that the tools of creation and distribution had changed dramatically as well. These were not expensive tools anymore. It didn't take a $100,000 film camera, or an animation studio employing 50,000, animators, doing hand drawings of animation. You could actually do it on your computer and buy the program at reasonable cost. That was interesting. That was different. It kind of reminded me of the way that filmmaking kind of got transformed around, so Spike Lee started it in the 80s with these more independently, well, he didn't start it, but Spike Lee did a lot of great stuff with independent filmmaking in the 80s. And then like the Blair Witch Project in the 90s, and you started to see digital prosumer tools come online, digital cameras and things like that made the cost of production much lower than it had been, and it opened up creativity in a big way. And then you had distribution that actually got lower, so you could distribute things through broadband that you couldn't distribute through the installed network. That was interesting. All of these things these thoughts were kind of triggered when I saw Flash. So that was a big, interesting time in my life. And I think we committed at that conference that we would actually start an agency. So, I mentioned Capital One and the opportunity that Capital One presented. One of the big entrepreneurial moves that I made in my career, and I think my career is a series of entrepreneurial moves. And by the way, I think I'm an entrepreneur, but I think that whether you choose to work for yourself, start an agency, work for a company, this is the age of entrepreneurship. You have to manage your career entrepreneurially. And I was thinking, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that you're a risk taker? Does that mean that you are a gunslinger? Does that mean that you are you don't like to report to other people, so you want to do your own thing? Does that mean that you don't like big companies? You know what I think entrepreneurship is at heart? And I haven't spent a lot of time on this definition, so don't critique it too severely, but I think entrepreneurship is about either the creation of an opportunity that others don't see, or leveraging an opportunity that others haven't leveraged, right? In a lot of cases, I've created my own opportunity because I saw something that I wanted to learn and what I wanted to do with it, and I thought I could parlay that into bigger and better things. I think entrepreneurs think like that. So I encourage you to think about your careers as such. When I went to work at Capital One, I went to work as a copywriter in their brand marketing group. I moved proactively to the digital team around 2000, 99, 2000. And that was not, there were a lot of higher ups that were kind of pissed off at that, you know, like, why is Moses leaving the group? He didn't talk to me about that. I'm not sure that's the greatest career path. We're doing $500 million of advertising over here. I'm not sure the digital team's actually doing that. What's going on? But because of all the things I just mentioned, I saw opportunity in the digital side of things, and I wanted to learn that. I wanted to immerse myself in it. I wanted to understand what was going on. And so I made that move. I kind of engineered that move at Capital One, and it was really, really formative in terms of things that I would do later. I became more and more fascinated by the digital world because, again, all of the things that I wanted to do, all the stories that I'd always wanted to tell were being enabled by digital. Because I could tell them independently of the larger broadcasters, I could get them to people, I could shape things, I could produce things in a really interesting fashion. I was really fascinated by digital. Around 2004 or 2005, I started a radio program with a digital component on Sirius. It was Sirius then, now Sirius XM. It was a program called Doing It, and it was really a program that focused on African American business, right? On a few different dimensions. So there was corporate, there was entrepreneurship, there was entertainment, and there was academia. And what I would do is I would, and this was entrepreneurial move number 2. I would literally produce this in my house. I had, Pro Tools, computers, some editing equipment, and I'd produce this program. And I would ship it up to XM, and they would air it every weekend. And the process was really, really interesting because I found that because I could leverage the XM brand, Sirius XM brand, people would actually talk to me. I could actually get interviews with interesting people. So I interviewed a host of Ivy League educators and entertainment moguls and entrepreneurs and corporate business people. Really interesting. But what I was really trying to do was play with the medium, play with the channel. I wanted to see how I would integrate digital into what had previously been more of an offline channel, radio. So I experimented with setting up a website that actually hosted a lot of the content that was also broadcast on Sirius XM. I played around with paywalls. Wanted to see if that model would actually work. So set up a paywall so you could actually stream content if you bought a subscription to the site. Added other components of content as well. So it was a radio show, but I would, behind the paywall, also offer some video segments and things of that nature. Really loved doing that, but when I opened the agency, I didn't have time to do both, and I felt like the agency was where I was actually going to be able to make some money. So decided to focus on that, but it was a really interesting experience working with Sirius XM on that project as well. And that is back to my point about being entrepreneurial, trying to figure out how things work, being fascinated with things. Really, really important to kind of immerse myself in the technology if I was going to use it. Okay. So, one other thing I wanted to mention that I learned at Capital One, which was just a big deal for me. The notion of a universe test. And let me explain that to you, why it was really, really interesting to me, kind of another landmark event for me. As a marketer and advertiser, I'd always thought about crafting the message, elegantly designing the message and putting it out there. Finding the target audience that I wanted to reach and putting it out there to them. So if I wanted to reach young professionals between the ages of 22 and 35, I'd create the ad, work with a media person to find out where those kinds of people hung out and deliver that message to them. And I thought that was the best way to actually market products and services. I participated in a universe test at Capital One one time, and I was kind of floored because it was a whole different way to think about things. So Capital One obviously is a purveyor of financial services products. We marketed, I worked a lot on the credit card side, so we were marketing credit cards. And as you think about who would use, what type of credit card, obviously there's some segments that kind of pop. If you're marketing a student card, you think students would be more interested. If you're marketing a black card, you think high income, affluent people would actually be more interested. What the universe test did was actually put out the messages into the marketplace without segmentation, right? So you didn't presuppose who was going to engage with your message. You just kind of put it out there and you watched what happened. That was really interesting because it wasn't like it wasn't like what we'd always done. And the interesting thing about it is what you found was, you saw the core group that you thought would be interested in your message, actually interested in your message, right? And you'd have the feedback mechanisms like click-throughs or applications or phone calls or that kind of thing. But you also saw these other populations that you would never, ever guess would be interested in your message, start to consume your message as well. Which really made me think, because it's like you're missing out on brands could be missing out on a whole different population because they've already kind of pigeonholed themselves with regard to this rigid segmentation. Another example was, has anybody ever heard of the Honda Element? I don't think they produce it anymore, but the Honda Element. That was a car that Honda designed and was marketed and advertised to young people, right? One of the things that was kind of the calling card for the Honda Element was that it was, it had enough room vertically to actually put the mountain bike in standing up, right? And so they were sure that this was going to appeal to young people. Turned out, older people were really buying the Honda Element in great force, primarily because it turns out older people have to move around a lot of stuff. And so the Honda Element had enough room for them to move around stuff. So that's a population that they actually found by accident. Had they done a universe test, they probably would have known that sooner. So another interesting thing that I learned at Capital One. All right, so it took me 10 years or 7 years after the internet world where I was like, we got to start an agency. This is really cool to actually start an agency. So in April 2007, we launched, but I didn't want to call it advertising. Because I felt like what we wanted to do went beyond just advertising. When I thought about advertising, I literally thought about ads, TV ads, print ads, radio ads, those types of things back then. Now, obviously, digital plays much more of a role. But we intentionally changed advertising to West Cary Group, right? So a little bit more nebulous as to exactly where you're focusing, intentionally, because the communications work that we did spanned lots of channels, spanned much more than just advertising. We worked on employee communications, where our target audience was, employees in organizations, and trying to keep them motivated and kind of, looped into what was going on strategically. We worked on public relations stuff. We worked on a lot of different stuff, and all of that we could house under the West Cary Group moniker. So, that was kind of how we got here. Now let's talk a little bit about where we're going. But first, the other thing I wanted to mention about West Cary Group was we, with the word group as opposed to advertising, we also wanted to help companies solve business problems, almost in a consulting fashion as opposed to just an advertising fashion. Sometimes the answer is better creative. Sometimes the answer is you got a product that nobody wants. Sometimes the answer is you're using channels that nobody consumes, or your target audience doesn't consume. Sometimes the answer is you're promising a great experience and your experience sucks, right? You got to fix your operations. These are all things that you see through the marketing process, but it's not necessarily what a typical ad agency would do. I think we were onto something, because if you look at today, the 4 of the world's top 10 agencies actually aren't what you consider to be agencies. They're consultancies. You got Accenture, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and that's IBM there. So, I think the market is changing, and the way people think about what advertising is actually changing. So I started this agency. Entrepreneurial move number, I forget what number I'm up to. Another entrepreneurial move in my life. Wow, and my dad will always tell me, you left a good job, went to start an agency. What were you thinking? But here's what you get to do as an entrepreneur. It's really cool. You get to be your own boss. You get to make your own hours. You get to work out in the middle of the day. Yeah. Build new things, lead teams, set strategy, compete every day, hire great new people, be on boards and go to cocktail parties with a lot of interesting people. That's all. I get to do all that as an agency owner. That's great, right? Sounds awesome, right? You ready to go start an agency? Yeah. But here's what you also get to do. You get to be the punching bag for an unhappy client, right? Because they don't want to talk to your people. They want to talk to you. They want to go to the top when they got an issue. You can make your own hours as long as they're, within that 20 hours a day that you're going to be working when you start out. You work out in the middle of the day, but you also might not get to work out for a number of days because you're working so much. Build new things, but you also get to kill projects that you actually love because the client doesn't want you to do those. They want you to work on the things that they're actually paying for. You have to lead teams, but you also have to admit that you're wrong. You set strategy, but you have to admit when you've led your teams astray. And I am not shy about saying, I led us astray. We gotta reconfigure here because we are headed down the wrong path. You compete every day, but you also freak out every day about being obsolete, especially these days where the industry is transforming and you're trying to figure out where true north is. You go, are we going to be a business 5 years from now? Because I don't necessarily know where the market's headed. Hire great new people, but sometimes you have to, this is the toughest thing about an agency. You have to fire really great people, not lousy people that aren't living up to the expectation, but sometimes clients go away. And you have to let go of people who have done nothing but give you great work. That is a tough part of the business. You have to be on boards and go to cocktail parties, or you can do that, but you have to also pretend. I'm actually an introvert. People find that hard to believe, but I'm actually introverted, and what I like to do is things like hang out and binge watch Ray Donovan. But I can't get to that because of the agency work. But all in all, I'd have to say, I've had a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So let's talk a little bit about where we're going. I think it's really interesting that we've reached this crossover point now. People have been talking about it for years. Hey, the world's going digital, the world's going digital. Sure, it was going digital, but we were still spending more and investing more in traditional channels than we were in digital. And I think this year is the year where it changes, right? So as you can see right here, digital media spending is going to be at 100.8 billion, and offline media, at 97. So as you can see, the trend has been, this has been the trend for a while, but this is actually the crossover point. We can officially say that we're going to spend more in digital than we are going to be spending in TV and that kind of thing. And that's really, really interesting because for so long, we as an agency had to play in the digital space while acknowledging that most of our revenue is actually coming in other places. So there's investment that you have to make to ensure that you're not going to be obsolete. But it was hard to justify on the balance sheet. Now that's changing, which is great. I think as we think about where we're going, a couple things to really, I think this is a build. Is it a build? A build? Yes, it's a build. There's no digital marketing anymore, I talk about digital versus traditional. There's no digital marketing. I mean, is there really a TV spot that's going to air without an accompanying social promotion or website or mobile application or mobile promotion as well? No. So we have to think that way. Even if you're using, traditional channels, there's always going to be a digital integration. A couple things that I've seen really interesting in the digital space of late. One is digital assistants, kind of connected devices in the home. Really interesting, right? I think this is right. Don't quote me, but I think the amount of installed connected devices in the home, digital assistant type devices like Alexa, somewhere in the 10 to 15 million range right now, and it's expected by 2020 to be in the 100 to 150 million range. Like by 2020, that's huge. And it's only, we're only touching the surface. Does anybody have an Alexa, an Echo? Does anybody have a HomePod? I just got the HomePod. I have Alexa at home. I have a HomePod in the office. That's one of the perks of being, I get the toys. But what do you think of it? What do you think of Alexa? It's all right, love it, good. I think it's pretty interesting. I think we're only scratching the surface. I think they do a pretty good job of voice recognition relative to like Siri and some of the things we've seen in the past, but I think we're only scratching the surface. We're starting to think about how we use these devices for our clients. One example is we work with a client that where you have to drive to retail, right? So we do promotions that drive you to physical stores. And you have to schedule appointments in those stores to actually get a medical exam. It's eye exam. That would be a whole lot easier if you just said, hey Alexa, schedule my appointment, than it is to go online, look for availability and that type of thing. That's a very, very simple example. But I think you're going to see much more to come with regard to connected devices very, very soon. I mean, the rate of penetration is just incredible. I also bought my wife a Series 3 Apple Watch for Christmas. Who's got the Series 3? That's really, wearables actually got interesting to me. Actually I have the Series 2, which is interesting because I can swim in this, but Series 3 is really powerful because it's basically a full-on computer and telecommunications device, right? So she doesn't have to take her phone, which is great because she forgets it a lot, loses it a lot, but she doesn't have to take her phone when she goes to play tennis or do whatever she does in the daytime. She's got, she can connect specifically through her phone with email, text, and phone calls. I think that's actually pretty fantastic. If you're a runner, it's great that you don't have to lug your phone around. Even though it's kind of small now, it's still a pain in the butt to lug your phone around when you're running. So I have a lot of interest in where that's going. I also think that there's another big trend that we are negotiating, which is data-driven marketing. So from my direct marketing days, I consider myself to be a data-driven marketer. I think about information and how to use it when we're marketing and advertising. But the future of data-driven marketing isn't clear because people are pushing back. I think it's fantastic that I know who you are and how many siblings you have and whether you're on the VCU campus or downtown or whether you like Chipotle or Qdoba. I think it's great that I know that because I can present to you information that is so personalized for your unique interests and tastes and things like that. But people are getting creeped out by this, and the government's getting creeped out by this, and there's pushback. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around cookies, which is kind of the primary behavioral kind of classification mechanism that we have right now. But we have to think about a world where cookies aren't existing. We have to think about a world where data isn't so easy to actually access. And I think that's good and bad. I feel like younger people are much more open to it than people in my generation and above, but I may be wrong on that. Interested to hear your viewpoints on that. But I don't think data-driven marketing is going to go away by any stretch of the imagination. People are going to use information to market and develop messaging and creative and that type of thing. But the guidelines around how you use it and what you have access to, not sure. Not sure what's going to happen there. Is there a media track in the Brandcenter?
No.
Okay. Media, that's me putting together my media strategy. Media is changing in a big, big way. And that is something that we are actually very, very cognizant of and looking at as well. This, again, is a great opportunity for the little guy. Because in the past, media was bought in really interesting ways. Most of the big players would have steak dinners with their media companies, and you'd do the upfronts, and you'd buy media, and they'd buy media on a television program that was about to debut in September that no one had ever seen. They didn't know if it was going to be successful or not, and they'd just buy it out. These days, the way that you buy media is very different. Has anybody heard of programmatic media buying? It's done much more mechanically. It's done through auction, so you actually, almost like commodities trading, you actually bid on inventory and figure out what inventory you're willing to pay what price for. Now, this started in display advertising, banner advertising, but it's now starting to permeate other channels as well. I feel like television advertising used to be bought that way, and not too long in other channels as well. I think the interesting thing about television is now with all the connected boxes, Roku, Chromecast, things like that, you're gonna have much more information when you're developing television ads as well. So I'll be able to create unique ads specifically to your specs, you know, as opposed to more generic ads. Really interesting things going on in media. Then the game-changing things. Augmented reality, which I think now it's the big time because we've got the developer kit in the iOS operating system now. So the AR kit is going to, just the way the Apple Store created this, energy and mobile applications, I think the AR kit is going to do the same thing with AR. Augmented reality is really interesting. Oftentimes we think about engagement in our business and how we're creating engagement with consumers, and augmented reality is very much a lean-in technology where you create this layer over the real world that can be information, can be design, can be a variety of things. And then I think when you talk about engagement, virtual reality, this is the ultimate game changer. I mean, I think at some point virtual reality will be indistinguishable from real reality. Now we're a ways away from that, but the kinds of things that people are starting to talk about are just, I can't even fathom where that's going. But all of these things become tools that we as marketers and advertisers can use and think about. So, this is where I stop. This is you guys' responsibility, not mine. You're gonna have to figure out artificial intelligence. It is beautiful, it's highly intriguing, and it's scary as hell. We use it now in some of our media placements and digital, but the way that things are going, AI is just incredibly fascinating. But I'm too old to actually leverage this technology in the way that it ultimately will be used. But it is so fascinating. Still has a way to go in marketing, but good Lord, the things you will be able to do. So, when I think about you guys, I actually wrote down the things that I think that you can think about as you start your careers that I won't have to worry about, right? And I don't mean this lightly. You guys are the most important generation, I think, in the history of humankind. In all seriousness, think about what's on the agenda for you guys. You can destroy the planet altogether, right? You can save the planet. You can destroy each other. You can colonize Mars. Your generation can colonize. That's a legitimate conversation now. You can colonize Mars. You could acknowledge the limits of capitalism because of things like AI, and start to think about things like universal income. That's kind of weird. That's different. You can potentially live forever, right? You can get enslaved by the machines. You can merge with the machines, the board, or you can preserve humanity. In the process, I think you can, in that context, you can transform advertising as well, which I'm positive you can do. But despite my words sounding dour, I'm actually really bullish. I'm like Warren Buffett. I will always bet on the indomitable spirit of human beings, right, and the humanity that you can create. And I think that the interesting thing about your generation is that you think about humanity in a way that previous generations have not. So I think we're in good hands. And I think that as we rationalize all of this new world order, if you will, some good brand stories are going to be told in the process. So the stakes are high, but I think you can handle it. Thank you very much. Answer questions?
I'd just like to ask the first question. When you opened, did you open with a client or without a client?
The question, if you can hear, was when I opened, did I open with a client or without a client? We actually opened with one client, a company called Land America, which was a Fortune 500 corporation that was in Richmond and did real estate kinds of things. They promptly went belly up, and so that was the jump-off client that you go, okay, at least we've got one paying client, we've got some income, and then they went to bankruptcy. They were very much involved in the, collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities kinds of things, and things didn't go well around 2008 with that business model. So I would highly encourage, if you're starting an agency, to have a client, though. At least some line of sight to stable income. Yes?
So regarding your current client base, what role have you taken to educate your clients on new technologies that you've been mentioning? Do you take that role, or do you give them the things that they're needing as far as like direct mail solutions and business?
Yeah, great question. If you didn't hear it, what role have we played in helping to educate our clients on new technologies? It's our obligation to educate our clients, so we do a great deal of that. I am fairly agnostic, as you kind of point out, with regard to what channel. I'm more interested in the business outcome that they want to drive, and then we'll figure out what channels to use, what technologies to use. Sometimes direct mail may still be the answer, and other times it may be a social program. Don't really care, but it's more about that, back to that consultancy model. Like, I'm trying to figure out what my client wants to do, and we'll help them get there. But we do take an active role. I consider it our obligation to present new technologies and also to help them think about the implications and the opportunities of that technology. Other questions? Yes?
Sort of as these things change, what new or emerging titles or roles are you introducing into your organization? And or how are your existing roles evolving or adapting?
Yeah, question, what new roles are developing in my agency as a result of what's going on, or what roles are we adapting to respond to the marketplace? Again, it sounds a little trite, but analytics is a big part of what we do and how we think about presenting content to the public. So, we've always had analysts in our group, but we're probably going to bring in more. Technology is also a place where we're growing. So developers. One of the things that was really interesting is we think about pivoting and how we pivot to a true digital technology-driven organization. One of my board members actually challenged me with kind of a bastardized version of the Bezos mandate, which is basically, Bezos actually said in Amazon that we are not going to allow people to communicate but by API, which is kind of interesting. So he was like, well, what would your organization look like if that were a mandate? And so we're actually thinking about that. I don't think we're not going to be Amazon, but if our services were available to be procured through API, if the different groups within our organization talked and actually requested work through API, what would things look like? So that takes a certain technology layer to actually execute that, and we're thinking about that.
One of you?
Yes?
You talked about a lot of different change in the industry. I was curious if there's anything that you've seen that stayed the same.
It stayed the same? I think most channels have been affected by digital in some way, shape, or form, vertical integration. I'd have to say the thing that stayed the same is that being able to tell a powerful story with your brand still is a major, major thing. Maybe even more important than ever before, right? Because it's very easy for your brand to become disparate because it's being told in such a fragmented way in snippets of 3 seconds and 2 seconds and 1 second. You've got to have a true north with regard to your brand story, and I think you got to be able to tell that story. It's one of the things that we saw with other digital agencies when we first moved into the market is they didn't seem to have the same capability around telling the brand story, and I think it's as important, if not more important, than ever before. That hasn't changed.
Unless there's one more call, there's one there.
Yes?
I was just wondering if you guys considered any alternative locations for starting your agency, or why exactly you chose Richmond to start an open?
Yeah, and did we consider any other locations, or why don't we start in Richmond? Kind of a cop-out answer, but I started in Richmond because I was here. I I did think about, you think about, all right, agencies are in New York for a reason, agencies are in Silicon Valley for a reason. In 2007, I kind of felt like the world was moving to a place where geography didn't necessarily limit you to the kinds of things you can do or access to clients, because even then, you had burgeoning technologies, video conferencing, things like that just made it easy. And some of that is true, but there are certain things that I think we do miss with our geography. So a lot of the best digital thinking is actually happening on the West Coast. And it's hard to emulate that if you're not exposed to it. They just think differently. To my point about APIs, like in Silicon Valley, if you've got a problem, you solve it with an engineer. You don't solve it with another professional services person. That's just the way they think. And so if you're truly going to pivot, I think you got to think in that fashion as well. So there's that, and then there's just clients have to be aware of you and your brand. And it's hard. It's easy for Richmond-based corporations to be aware of your brand, but harder for New York and Chicago and London-based organizations to be aware. So you have to continually fight to be heard and to shout to be recognized.
Every time I'm about to wrap up, someone puts their hand up, so I'm just making sure are there any hands up? No, okay. I know you're doing a Q&A back at Brandcenter.
Yep.
So I just want to thank you for sharing your life with us.
Thank you.